What a treat to have Jane Ledwell on the show. She's a writer and a poet, an editor, an advocate for gender equality, and one of my first university teachers. We talked about the importance of being creative in a world that pressures us not to be, and why so many artists are choosing to make PEI their home.
Art, I want you. Art, you make it pretty hard not to. And my heart is trying hard here to follow you, but I can't always tell if I ought to.
Jane Ledwell, thank you so much for coming out here to your homeland.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I want to start off with a really kind of broad question. What inspires you the most when you think of creating something, writing something, whatever? Is it personal experience? Is it imagination? Is it something else? Or is it a combination of many things?
I think it is a combination of many things. And, inspiration, I find, doesn't always come unless you open the door for it. It has to be invited in. And so what can invite it in can be personal experience, or it can be following curiosity about something. A lot of times I write poetry, and a lot of poetry, and especially poetry by women, is perceived to be autobiographical, whether it is or not. It's stereotyped as kind of confessional,
Much
and
like songwriting by women.
absolutely like songwriting by women. So sometimes that is true. Sometimes it is coming from the inspiration of the self. But in the last number of years, I've found that I had to kind of focus on projects in order to open the door for inspiration. And so those projects, I've just followed something that I was interested in and started writing and reading and jotting things down or noticing things with an intention. And it's like with all forms of art, you do the work, and it's better if inspiration jumps in there and does part of the work for you, but often it doesn't. And sometimes you can work hard and get a good result, and sometimes you can be inspired and get a good result, but usually it requires a combination of the two.
Yeah. And do you find as you get more experienced in your art forms that you can find a way to open the door to inspiration more easily, or not?
I think the challenge is time. The challenge becomes time when at a certain point I'm at a point in my life where I have two teenagers, and they require a roof over their heads and have for some time. They require food a number of times a day, and the world is very expensive. And so I have to spend a lot of time on paid work and trying to inject creativity into that as much as I can. But it takes a lot of the time and energy that I might use to open the door for other inspirations. So sometimes it's a matter of fighting for space in one's own life, in my own life, for work on art, and sometimes it's a matter of resting enough so that when I do make the time, I will be able to have the energy or have the insight to be able to take advantage of the time. So it's always a combination of things, but it has been most helpful for me to kind of set a project, set a goal, set a deadline. And I don't have one right now. And so so I have been doing some writing, but I haven't I only wrote one poem last year, and it took 7 months. But, I did that because I had a project and a goal and a deadline, and so that it did eventually get finished. And some of the 7 months is sitting in a box under my bed, right? I do think that a lot of things benefit from sitting in a box under one's bed.
Yeah. A lot of your literary work, it seems, is very much inspired or involves Prince Edward Island in some way. What is it about the island that is so rich in inspiration for you?
It's I can tend to be a little bit flippant about the decision to stay in Prince Edward Island because it is it is not easy to be here, and I love it here, and I have a complex relationship with it that looks easy, and I have an easy relationship with it that looks complex. So there's a lot of contradiction in being from a place back several generations, and living here most of my life. Now, I did go away, and it didn't take. When I lived other places, I was I was very homesick, like debilitatingly homesick, and that is a bit of a limitation, but it is also it is also a signal. So, like, when I'm flippant about it, I say, "Oh, well, I can't be anywhere else because I'm debilitatingly homesick when I'm somewhere else." But really, the fact of it is that um, I have come to know that this is the place that my work as a human being is meant to take place, and with all of that, all of the good things that come with that, and all of the challenges that come with that, it's just I'm meant to figure things out here. I'm meant to exist here. I'm meant to negotiate this space as as Mi'kmaq territory, and as the place where my ancestors settled, and as the place where I was born, and as the place where all of my parents and grandparents and 7 of 8 of my great-grandparents were born. And, 5 siblings and now my 2 kids, right? So it's a lot. We're here in St. Peter's Bay, which is where my dad was born and where he grew up, and where he's buried across the bay. And one of the first dates that I had with my partner was at the St. Peter's Cemetery, because we just wanted to check before asking anybody else if his relatives in the cemetery and my relatives in the cemetery were the same relatives in the cemetery. And, they are different. And as soon as I said to my dad, it's like, "Oh, no, don't even worry about it." Like, but, he lived in Morel for the first 2 years of his life. And his grandmother was a McGinnis who married a McGinnis. So there were 2 lines of McGinnises, and there were McGinnises who married Gillises, who were my paternal grandmother's people for generations. It's like, okay, well, we're probably not closer than 5th cousins. But at a certain point, I think all of our kids' ancestors probably are named McGinnis.
Yeah, that resonates with me because I'm a McDonald and both of my parents were also McDonald's. So there's many different lines of McDonald's that I'm related to out there. When you were talking about kind of the back and forth of this is where I need to be, but it's difficult. Like, I find that the conflict in between, like conflict or being in between 2 things, can be such a rich place to make art from also. And I think a lot of people that grew up here and left and then came back feel very similar things.
I think that it is valuable to go away and come back. With the acknowledgement that that's not available to everyone, that there is a privilege in being able to go away, and there's a privilege in being able to come back. I was reflecting recently a lot when they talk about the economic circumstances that are available for young people at the moment. They're saying it hasn't been this bad since the mid-90s, and that's when I came back to PEI, and it was bleak. Most of the people I've been to a high school graduation this week in Summerside, and I was thinking about the number of people that I graduated with who had to go away to get richer than I wanted to be, to have a life of middle class success that would be, or professional opportunities, or those things just were not available here for people of my generation or people at my time. And there are those who stayed and who created those opportunities or who made it work. But I was thinking of all of the all of the young people, a lot of people who had the wherewithal had to go.
Mm.
And it was presumed that you would go.
Mm-hmm.
And quite a lot of the people who ended up staying, it was partly because of an artistic attachment to
Mm-hmm.
PEI. It was because they wanted to work at least part of the time or in the arts or create create things, and they had an attachment um, to this culture and this society that they wanted to express, this landscape and natural
Mm-hmm.
habitat
Mm-hmm.
that they wanted to express. So it's a lot of those folks, more of those folks stayed than the folks who wanted to be engineers.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I don't know if you remember, but I actually had you as a teacher in my first year of university.
I do remember.
Do you
Of
do?
course I remember.
1997, I think it was. And it was, I mean, it was a very basic English course, but I remember it as being really great. And it helped me understand that I should be focused on the arts instead of the sciences, which was where I was planning on a pre-architecture program before. Anyway, I mean, it didn't help that I then almost failed some maths and physics classes, which also told me that I should be in arts. But um, I was wondering how, like, for you teaching that age group, probably most people would be in their late teens. It must have been very interesting. And most of the kids of that age are really kind of trying on adulthood for the first time and figuring out what writing means to them.
Yeah.
What did you enjoy about teaching?
Well, I really did love teaching. So I did a master's degree in English literature. I very handy, very daily use kind of master's degree in New Zealand art and culture. So literature and culture. So it just comes in handy all the time. And so when I came back to PEI, it was very challenging to find work, but I did have opportunities to teach sessionally in the Department of English at UPEI starting in 1997. So you might have been one of my almost first
classes.
students. And I love teaching writing and literature and seeing people grapple with ideas and find their words and find their voices, even if it is a fairly basic introduction to 5-paragraph structure and making sure you have your MLA citations in the right order and following rule books. A lot of that is kind of pro forma, but I wasn't a lot older than my students. So I was in 1997, I was 25, and I had brothers who were 17 and 18. So I was teaching a lot of their friends, which was interesting. Fortunately, not teaching them. They went to other universities. It was best. I think I taught a summer course to one of my brothers who did a summer course at UPEI one year. But other than that, I managed to avoid teaching my own siblings. But it was I taught a lot of morning classes. I don't know if you were in one of my 8:30 classes.
Maybe.
But that was a really good way of really seeing students at their best and their worst.
Yeah.
Because it takes a special student to sign up for English 101 at 8:30 on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And sometimes people were up for that, and sometimes they realized they had made a terrible mistake. But no, I definitely remember you being a wonderful writer and full of creativity. I remember that you were quiet and serious at that time, but there were always students who had a spark of interest that they could follow, and whether their talent was using words to follow that spark of interest, or math and engineering, or architecture to follow that, it becomes really recognizable when students are in university. It's a wonderful opportunity for students to have that moment of exploration as they're transitioning into adulthood. And as universities become more and more kind of corporatized and more focused on churning out products to be ground up into whatever
Mm-hmm.
global capitalism is demanding. It feels like it's more of a struggle for people to take the time to find their voice, or the stakes are so high with the cost of university and the cost
Yeah.
of post-secondary education in general. It's quite unfair, but at the same time, if if you if you can make it, if you can do it, it's a tremendous privilege and opportunity to just try on, as you say, those disguises of
Mm-hmm.
adulthood and those disguises um, of who you might be in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely found that, I tried on a lot of different um, courses at university. I was only there for about 2.5 years, and then I realized I shouldn't be spending any more money because I had no idea what I wanted to do, and so I left and traveled and wrote songs. But how wonderful would it be for people to just take a whole bunch of different classes and a whole bunch of different things for a bunch of years? Because a lot of that did inform what I ended up doing
And I
in my life.
really do believe in that kind of liberal arts education where, um, which is less and less available now,
Mhm.
but which is still a wonderful model of being exposed to a wide range of courses, of disciplines, of ways of learning, ways of knowing the world, ways of understanding yourself, and being in a soup of
Yep,
with all kinds of weird other vegetables that you might not have put together before. And
exactly.
I would like for more students to have that opportunity more of the time. As I say, I like, you might not have gotten it, but I was actually being ironic when I said that I use my master's degree in New Zealand literature and culture all the time. I
No, I
actually
believe you.
don't. I know and that's going to sound shocking, you know. I
Yeah.
can put on a bit of an accent once in a while, and that's about it. I can watch reruns of Flight of the Conchords and have some cultural knowledge to share. But that cultural knowledge is also very old now, like 30
Mhm.
years. Um, but that's not the that wasn't the point. Like learning, it's the ways of learning, the ways of knowing, it's the research skills and all of those things that are the skills that I could carry into later life. Like training for a job should be training provided by employers.
Yep.
And learning to think should be available to all humans.
Mhm. Yeah. What made you get into editing books and other things? Is it kind of a natural progression of I can make money doing this, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I started out mostly doing it for free. So,
Mhm.
sometimes people talk about monetizing their hobbies. Mostly in my house, we're really good at demonetizing our careers. Um, it's like, oh, well, I'll do that because you're my friend.
Yeah.
Or because your book is really interesting. It was really challenging to find work when I came back to PEI.
Mm.
And I was teaching sessionally at UPEI, and then I was also doing some work with the Institute of Island Studies at the University of PEI, and mostly coordinating conferences,
Mhm.
which I had some experience with as a volunteer through my years at university. Like it was just something that I had done with some groups that I was part of, had a chance to help organize meetings and conferences or national meetings and conferences. So I had, that was one of the like tools in my toolkit for being able to do some work. So I was mostly organizing conferences, but the Institute of Island Studies in the late 90s had at least 3 professional editors in
Mm.
like in place in the institute. So it was a really great place to have that skill mentored by people. And one of the folks there was Laurie Brinklow, who was publishing books for Island Studies and also running Acorn Press.
Mhm.
And so I helped her out with a number of books on it. in non-editing roles, but and then eventually in editing and starting to get my feet wet on that, and then had an opportunity to do a short course on book editing at Simon Fraser University, like a 1-week book editing immersion program. So which is really the only professional book editing that I did, or training that I did. And other than that, it was just learning on the fly. Like when you're editing books in particular, you learn a lot from the authors. They, if you open a good line of communication, they'll tell you what they need. They will tell you, what their intention is and how you can help them get there. And and they'll tell you when you've gone astray as well. They will say, yeah, I don't think you're right about that. And I'm not going to do that. And that's tremendous learning. So, so the key thing is building the trust and communications around, and making sure they know that the goal of any editor should be to be the book's best reader, and that the intention is to get the writer's voice to the very best place it can get. So I don't get to edit a whole lot of books at the moment. I'm working on a book of poetry that Yvette Doucette is working on for Acorn Press right now, and it's a beautiful book. It barely needs me, but I'll be able to. But I do love that interaction with authors.
Yeah. I love hearing you talk about that, because a little while ago when I started writing something that could turn into a novel, I didn't start for the longest time because I felt like I had to have it, like I had to make it perfect, and then eventually I've realized that, oh no, there's editors. That's their job to help you, to help you get there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then I looked up what is an editor. And then I was like, oh, okay. And it just took the pressure off, and I could just try out a bunch of things and see what happened.
It's a lot like a music producer in some ways,
That's what I got to, yeah.
Yeah, and as a lot of those kinds of, a lot more gets put onto artists as individuals now, and we can be like self-publishing or putting out an indie music, record or album or whatever. Sometimes there isn't the support or the maybe even reminder that these things go better with a collaboration, with some help, with some connection to community. And I think that music producers, editors, curators, all of these roles are there to help artists not only attain their best voice, but it's a connection with community. It's like, well, I am a reader, I am a listener, I am a viewer of art, and I can help make sure that you are communicating what you want to share with the world the best way possible. And so as more gets pushed down on individuals, or individuals feel more pressure to just go it alone, it's not only taking away those tools of self-development and improvement, it's also taking away that connection to the community and the cultural conversation that can be provided through record labels. Not that I'm saying these institutions should survive just because they used to make money, but like publishers, record labels, galleries, they can at their best provide some of that communication with the wider culture.
Yeah. And just a team of people that aren't in the artist's head with the artist, that can bring a perspective from outside.
Anything that's not happening in my head has to be a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. Were you editing before you wrote your first book? Or did this all kind of happen at the same time?
So the first book that I wrote was published in 2005, and it had poems. The earliest one that I had written was when I was like 19, I think.
Mm.
And so I don't remember. I can't remember when I was 19. I can't do the math on that anymore. That would be about 1991. So the poems had been written over a 12 to 14 year period. Like, there was an editing process as well. So I was writing before I was doing any editing. Most of that was not publishable, but it was, but I was doing quite a lot of writing fairly seriously from my late teens on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A lot of people know who your father was, Frank Ledwell. A bit of a legend on PEI in poetry and prose and teaching. What did you learn from his work and his work ethic that you kind of carry on today?
Well, I think that Dad's greatest strength really was as a teacher. He was and an encourager of other people's writing and creativity. He loved it so much. Like he loved his students. He loved their work. That doesn't mean he didn't get frustrated sometimes. And so he had a like hard case suitcase briefcase that he carried his papers back and forth from the university in, and he would every evening set it up on his lap and use it as a desk as he marked papers. And he marked papers every evening. Like he was working every evening and every weekend, and because he liked to have as many students as he could manage, which which he couldn't always manage as many as wanted to sign up.
Right. Yeah.
But so I remember him, engaging with young people's writing all the time at home. And, he also watched the news and watched some sports and slept through any number of sitcoms. But mostly he was there with the briefcase and a couple of papers on the go. And even from the time I was quite young, and hopefully, some of his students from the 80s won't be too offended if I say that, when I was a teenager, sometimes he would get stuck and he would just ask me to read something and just say, well, like, what can I say about this? or, do you have, like, I'm really stuck on this. I don't know. I don't know what direction, what to say that a young person would respond to. So, just to get an extra perspective. I don't know if I was ever helpful, but I was definitely curious. I definitely wanted to read what all the older students were reading when I was a younger teenager.
So this seems like a natural progression then to you getting a job teaching.
Yeah.
When that was happening, did you feel like that was something that you had wanted to do? Or people usually either go one way or the other when their parents are known for something like that?
Well, I think it would have been, at a certain point, it would have been a natural progression for me to carry on and do a doctoral program and go into academic teaching. That was definitely a path that was available to me, and that I could have followed. And it was complicated by the fact that I wanted to live here. The chances of doing a doctoral program and having an opportunity to work here in PEI were very slim, especially given that I, studied English literature, and the English department was, like, my dad only retired from the English department in 1995 when I was in a master's program. So, PEI might be famous for nepotism, but that wasn't going to happen. Like, it wasn't going to happen that I was going to do a doctorate and just walk into a job at UPEI. In fact, it was probably less likely because of that connection. So as much as I love teaching, and I have no regrets that I chose not to focus on an academic career. I have friends and peers from that time who chose academic career and who've made wonderful lives for themselves in universities, and I don't regret that I decided not to. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it would have been really hard to have an academic career and be here. And teaching at a younger than post-secondary level wasn't it, I might I love teaching, so I might have gone back to that if things hadn't if I hadn't started doing other things.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was broadly interested in a lot of different things, I just kept going in different directions. So, working at the Institute of Island Studies, I was exposed to editing. I was also exposed to research and public policy, and I've always been very interested in policy, and that led to work with with doing work on policy with the Advisory Council on the Status of Women. And then I've been there more than 20 years now, ended up in a director's role. But I started out just because I liked writing public education
Mm-hmm.
documents on policy issues. And and so that's been it's a teaching role, but in a very different way.
Yeah, and a creative role too, I would say, in a different way. Like you must have to do a lot of thinking outside the box in that role.
Well, I think most jobs benefit from creativity,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes we're discouraged from using our creativity
Mm-hmm.
in all kinds of workplaces and for all kinds of reasons. And I think it's one of the most. It sounds a little aggrandizing to say it's an act of resistance, but it is, because a lot of things are trying to work against our instincts as humans
Mm-hmm.
to use our creativity to connect to, or it gets co-opted into innovation or um,
Mm-hmm.
something in the service of creating products. But there's almost no job that isn't better if we add a little creativity and a little
Yep.
of whatever we have as individuals to add into
Mm-hmm.
it. If we have visual flair, then adding that in. If we have music, then adding that in. If we have the ability to write in an interesting way, then adding that in. If we organize code in a creative way, then
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing that isn't a little bit better.
Yep.
And certainly I think people's days are a little bit better if
Yep.
if you're trying to
You can
survive whatever.
engage that part of your brain during your day. Yeah.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
sometimes sometimes I just tell my coworkers, okay, I need my Sharpies time. I need some paper and colored pencils for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Totally. You've been interviewing artists for a column in the Buzz for a very long time. Have you noticed any themes of what inspires artists in PEI or whoever you've been interviewing? And also, like, why is PEI a great place for artists?
Okay, so I did interviews with artists for The Buzz for over 20 years. So probably over 200 interviews with
Mm.
people who were usually people who were active in more than one way with the arts community. And that was a deliberate choice from The Buzz's co-founders, Peter Richards and Nancy Richards, to make sure that it wasn't just someone who was standing out in one field necessarily, or who was going to get the attention anyway, but someone who was maybe branching out
Mm.
in ways that people might not notice, or who was involved in various aspects of the cultural community and the wider community. And so one of the themes was like, how do you make a life pulling those bits and pieces together? How does one part of your creative life in theater inspire your creative life as a visual artist? Or, putting those having those chances to see how people build a life that involves creativity, and how people are contributing to the community with the talents and interests and curiosities that they have. So that was always a theme. Oh, at different times, different themes emerged. Like, I think for the first 10 years, I'm not sure I had very many interviews that didn't at some point talk about the School of Visual Arts that used to exist in PEI and the loss of the School of Visual Arts, because but and then, after 10 years, it's almost forgotten that there was such a thing,
Yeah.
that there was that opportunity, that there was that training, within the heart of our community that offered a variety of skills and opportunities. And so, I think about that as an example
Hmm.
as of a theme that kind of came and went, and it sometimes the themes that emerged were the comings and goings of collaborative efforts or of learning opportunities or of institutions that had been created and that came apart, or so that you see that over time for sure.
Mhm.
A lot of people just talked about the challenge of making art
Mhm.
in a small place. Um,
That theme hasn't disappeared at all.
no, and I don't think it will.
No.
The challenge of ensuring that there is fair value and compensation for 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 the contributions of artists and cultural contributors in our community. Um, when there is that prevailing idea that, well, you're doing it because you love it, so that's the value,
Yeah.
um, and or
Who
you,
needs food?
yeah, or you'd be doing it anyway. You're doing it for free anyway, so I might as well have it. Um,
Right.
and And artists are very clear that they do need food and they do
Mm.
need housing and they do need to create, and they are going to do it anyway. And there are various ways of creating value, but you can't create that value unless you can eat. And
Mhm.
you can't make time and space in your life for creation without some forms of support for that, or non-art income of one description or another.
Mhm.
So those themes came out a lot over time, and what, but people who have people who choose to be here and choose to create here, um, it usually is a choice. Um,
Mhm.
it's usually not an accident or something that just happened at random or something that's haphazard. Sometimes there are people who blow through for a few years because they're here with a partner, or they blow through for a few years because there's a particular opportunity available.
Mhm.
But for most people at most times, it's something that they've decided, and they're wrestling with with the pros and cons of that decision. It's like, okay, here I
Yeah.
am. But I think that I that's so needed. Like the the way that arts on the island make visible that choice to engage with this place and to be here is so needed right now,
Mm.
when those questions of belonging, or those, I was just downtown yesterday and somebody said, "So are you from the island?" to a stranger, and he said, "Well, I've been here 5 years,"
Mhm.
because he didn't feel allowed to say, "Yeah, I'm an islander. I
Mm.
chose to live
Mhm.
here 5 years ago." And that's r that's wrong. I think we absolutely have to give that term or that label of islander to anyone who chooses to be here, or feels connected to, has had to choose to move away, but feels connected here.
Mhm.
Like if you identify with that, I think we need to explode that term and take it away from anyone who says that you have to be born here, who says that you have to do anything in particular. And I think that artists kind of show us how that can be done.
Yeah. So your books can be found out there in the world, I think, in stores and
Probably just
online.
mostly the bookmark.
Yeah. Yeah. God love the bookmark. Um, are you working on anything new that you wanted to mention? You said
Well, so so I have 3 books of poems, and they are the first was just called Last Tomato, and as you said, it was kind of a compendium of or a selection from poems that I had written over 10 or 12 years on a couple of themes, mostly just
Tomatoes? No.
yeah, vegetables, vegetables, nature, walks, sex and death.
Mhm.
I write a lot about birds and cemeteries, so I kind of lean into that. It's at a certain point, it's like, yeah, this has more birds in it. So the second book was a project inspired by a visit by a pioneering travel writer, a British imperialist by the name of Isabella Lucy Bird, who spent about 6 months on PEI in the 1850s. And I had always wanted, since finding out about her writing about PEI and her connection to this place, I had always wanted to kind of respond to that. So that one was called Bird Calls and kind of subtitled The Island Responds. And probably really just a chapbook length project, but with her writing worked in, it, makes a book. And then because because having a project gave me a framework I decided to do another project, and it was actually suggested by the publisher of Bird Calls. It was published by Island Studies Press, and Joan Sinclair was running it at the time, and she said, well, you really should do something with Catherine Hughes, who was someone who was born in PEI, went through any number of weird first careers that were like first groundbreaking careers for a woman, and then became enamored of and became a propagandist for the cause of Irish republicanism. And wrote pamphlets and lectured and fundraised and it became the focus of her life. And then and she died mostly forgotten in she died young and mostly forgotten. And but her life was so weird, and and so I decided to write another series of poems about her. And we started out talking about how often women's poetry is considered autobiographical. And so sometimes those projects, my intention was to go far beyond, to get so far out of my own experience that it wouldn't be so personal. But then the Catherine Hughes poems, the only ones that work in there are probably the most personal poems that I've written. And it was called Return of the Wild Goose, and I almost called it Call of the Wild Goose before I realized that would actually be 2 books in a row that were just called Bird Calls. And so last year I said I only wrote 1 poem, and again, I needed a project. So there was a call for the Journal of L.M. Montgomery Studies that I do some editing and proofreading for, a call for responses to Maud Montgomery's 150th birthday. And so I thought, well, that sounds like the kind of project that I could do something. So my daughter is a visual artist, and we put in a proposal to do something jointly, that she would do an illustration and I would write a poem. And so it's a fairly long poem, by my standards, it's a fairly long poem about Ella Montgomery's relationship with her cousin Frederica Campbell, who was her closest friend and in some ways the greatest love of her life. And so it was fun to explore that with my daughter, and so that was published. And then this year, I'm not working on any poems that I can think of per se. The last number of years, I've been involved with the River Clyde pageant, and so sometimes there are lines of poems or lines that get thrown into the beautiful mix of creativity that comes out as a pageant, so that's fun. But what I'd like to be working on, and am finding every excuse to avoid working on, is a murder mystery.
Nice.
Yeah, so I have done some work on that. I'd like to. I need some sustained attention, but I can always put it off another day by thinking, well, maybe I'll just read another murder mystery instead of working on mine, just to see how other writers are doing it. And especially I really should read this because it's someone else's first murder mystery. And it'll either tell me that I can't possibly do this or that I absolutely can.
That's exciting. Thank you so much for coming out here. This
No
was really
worries.
fun.
No worries. It's nice to be in St. Peter's, and I'm going to, I don't know if we're going to make it up to the cemetery today, but, Stephen might already be there just saying hello to the Rellies.
Could be. Yeah. I hope he's not blowing away.
He may be.
I wondered what would be the worth of my words in the world if I write them and then recite them, are they worth being heard? Just because I like them, does that mean that I should mic them and see what might unfurl? And I think of the significance of my opinions here. Is it significant to be giving them? Does anybody care? Just because I'm into this, does that mean that I should live like it? And really, do I dare? Art, I want you. Art, you make it pretty hard not to. And my heart is trying hard here to follow you, but I can't always tell if I ought to. So I pondered the point of my art in this life. If I make it, will someone take it and think that it's genuine? Would they be glad that I did, 'cause they got something good out of it? Would they leave me and be any more inspired? And I question the